Well, the European Union reaching out to the Arab League for help today. This after dozens of arrests this week across Europe as countries try to prevent another series of attacks like those in Paris from happening and track down these sleeper cells and perhaps their suppliers as well. Now, the Europeans say they want to share intelligence to see who has been heading off to train in the Mideast and who may now be heading home. Mauro is here. He's a security analyst for the Clarion project. So let's start there with the Arab League. If that, on your list of priorities, where would you place working with the Arab League?
I'm not concerned so much with working with the Arab League per se, but I want to work with individual movements within the Arab world, specifically within Egypt and Tunisia, where there is a very strong movement to separate mosque and state. And they criticize us and Europe because they say that we're not looking at the problem broadly enough, that this isn't just about Al-Qaeda and ISIS, that this all stems from a similar ideology, and they are at the forefront in tackling it, so we should ally with them.
So what would that look like working with partners in Egypt, for example?
Well, we have to come up with a common de-radicalization program, a program to counter the ideology, and that's what they want to do. There was an Egyptian government commission that was put together where they outlined a plan to separate mosque and state and to go after what's called political Islam or Islamism, and they do it in the name of Islam. They say it's not against our faith to separate mosque and state. That's what we should be doing. We need to modernize our interpretations. It's a historical moment, potentially.
Why did that happen?
That was because of a backlash against the Muslim Brotherhood, because you had these Islamists campaigning across the region that were saying, you've experienced secular dictatorship, you've aligned with the West, it hasn't worked out well for you, so let's govern based on Allah, based on Sharia. And so it sounded good, but then they experienced it in Tunisia and Egypt, and they said, you know what, we don't want this, we want a new beginning.
Interesting. So this, and really we've seen those comments coming from the president of Egypt, really this has been gathering steam over the last 3 or 4 weeks. In the meantime, Europe has a real serious issue it's confronting right now. And you say integration is where the Europeans should be focusing in their own cities and towns. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that there's a problem with identity here, where you have some immigrants coming in and some people that were actually born there that don't identify with the societies in which they live. And European leaders are acknowledging this. President Obama rightly commented that this is probably the biggest danger that Europe faces, because whereas in the U.S. you have a Muslim American community that identifies as American, you don't have that as much in Europe, and that's a very big problem. There's a Muslim mayor in the Netherlands that actually went on live television and cursed off Islamists that won't accept free speech and accept the societies that they live in, and he said, pack up your bags and leave.
Now, do you get the feeling that the crisis of identity in some of those communities in Europe has to do with the Muslim identity being so strong and the national identity being weak? Here we've seen this movement to the EU, this Europe, unified Europe, rather than very distinct countries with very distinct policies and currency. Do you think that has something to do with it at all?
There's two currents that are really damaging here. On the one hand, you do have the Islamist ideology that breaks that identity, that says that the West doesn't have a place for you and your religion is not just a faith but a form of governance, and then that conflicts with national identity. But then you also have forces that want to marginalize the Muslim community, and that's very damaging, and it's very good for groups like Al-Qaeda. The Muslim mayor, as I mentioned, that cursed off the Islamists, when he was originally appointed to that position, there were some powerful forces saying, well, he's from Morocco, so he shouldn't be in that position. He's the son of an imam, so he shouldn't be in that position. But there was no evidence of extremism. He lived in the country since he was 15 years old, and now he's a very powerful voice that we need now.
So you're saying embrace, especially those figures. I want to ask you about this. You know, we're seeing all these different terror rates, right? We had them in Paris, we had them in France, in Belgium as well, and then in Germany. And there are law enforcement officials in Berlin, and we're showing some of the footage now, that say they don't all have to do with each other. They're not all connected. And Ryan, I'm really curious your opinion on that. Is that true, that these aren't connected? It's just happenstance that these raids are happening, or is there a common thread here?
The common thread is that they follow the same ideology. Sometimes when we talk about homegrown extremism, it's a little bit misleading in terms of terminology because they're usually communicating with people overseas. There's an indoctrination process that takes place. So operationally, they may not be connected, but in terms of fighting against this threat, it doesn't really matter. They're part of the same wave of extremism.
Ryan, great to see you as always.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. John?
A stark warning.